My towel slipped off, landing softly on the floor. "Natalie," he whispered, his voice trembling with awe as his eyes lingered on me. His fingers traced along my curves with a gentle reverence, as though committing every inch to memory. That moment marked the beginning of it all. Before we dive into the story, I'd like to remind you to subscribe to our channel and give our videos a like. Every interaction you share means the world to us. It fuels our passion to keep bringing meaningful stories your way. If you enjoy this content, feel free to comment, ask questions, or share it with others. Together, we're building a connected, engaged community. Stay with us until the end, and thank you for being here. My name is Natalie, and if I may say so myself, beauty has always walked beside me. Even at 65, my curvaceous figure, smooth complexion, and radiant smile still turn heads. My thick gray hair cascades in soft waves past my shoulders, and my honey brown eyes seem to carry secrets that draw people in. Though I've led a quiet life since my husband passed, I still catch the lingering gazes and hear the hushed whispers whenever I'm out. But truthfully, none of that holds much meaning to me anymore. Life has become peaceful, predictable even, and I've grown used to the solitude. Romance, I've kept it at arm's length. That's not to say I haven't had suitors. Men of all ages, gray-haired gentlemen seeking companionship and younger men, too eager in their pursuits, have tried to win me over. But I always turn them down. I'm too old for the games of love, I tell myself. Yet deep down I know it's not just that. I've shut my heart away. After losing someone I loved, the thought of unlocking that door again feels unbearable. One evening, as the setting sun painted the sky in warm hues of orange and pink, my phone rang. It was Ethan, my nephew, my older sister Susan's only son. At 26, Ethan brimmed with energy, his mischievous grin always hinting at some trouble brewing. His tall, athletic frame and easy confidence made him a magnet for attention, particularly from women. My sister often called me, exasperated by his antics. "Natalie," Susan would say, "this boy is going to be the death of me. He can't seem to stop chasing women." I'd laugh, brushing it off. "It's just a phase," I'd assure her. "Boys his age are often like that." But truth be told, Ethan wasn't like other young men. His charm ran deeper, and women fell for him even when they knew better. "Hi, Aunt Natalie." Ethan's cheerful voice came through the phone. "Ethan," I said warmly. "What's going on?" "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said hesitantly. "Not at all. What's on your mind?" "I was wondering," he began, "if I could stay with you for the weekend. I just need a break from everything." I paused, caught off guard. Ethan wasn't one to ask for help or a place to stay without good reason. He was always busy, either with work or his lively social life. My home, a serene, cozy retreat with a garden in the back, was the last place I'd expect him to seek out. Yet there was something in his voice, a vulnerability that made me reconsider. "Of course, Ethan," I replied warmly. "You're always welcome here." "Thanks, Aunt Natalie," he said, sounding a little lighter. "I'll see you Friday evening." After we hung up, I found myself wondering, what could he be running from? Was it a failed relationship? A fight with Susan? Ethan was always a bit of an enigma, full of surprises and complexities that made him hard to figure out. Whatever the reason, I felt a mix of curiosity and concern. When Friday finally came, the evening seemed to arrive in the blink of an eye. I was sitting in the living room when I heard his car pull into the driveway. Opening the door, I saw Ethan standing there, a slightly different version of the boy I'd watched grow up. He wore dark jeans and a fitted black t-shirt that highlighted his athletic frame. His smile was bright, as always, but there was something behind his eyes, a restlessness, a quiet tension that didn't match his usual confident demeanor. "Aunt Natalie," he said warmly, pulling me into a hug. "You look amazing as always." I laughed. "And you're as charming as ever. Come in and make yourself at home." As Ethan stepped inside, he took in the familiar sights of my cozy living room. The scent of freshly baked bread still lingered in the air, adding to the warmth of the space. My home had always been a haven, a place where people could breathe a little easier. But tonight, as Ethan looked around, I could sense he was searching for something. Peace, maybe, or clarity amidst whatever chaos he'd left behind. Settling onto the couch, he let out a long sigh, like he'd been carrying the weight of the world. I've really missed this place, he said. I chuckled. You're acting like it's been years since you were last here. Well, it feels like it, he replied, leaning back and closing his eyes. Life's been such a whirlwind lately. I haven't had a moment to breathe. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued, but stayed quiet, hoping he'd share more. He smiled faintly and shook his head, as though he wasn't ready to open up just yet. Later we moved to the garden, where a gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers. We sat in comfortable silence, the crickets and rustling leaves filling the gaps. Eventually, Ethan broke the quiet. You know, Aunt Natalie, he began softly. Sometimes I feel like I'm trapped in this endless cycle. The parties, the women, it's fun at first, but after a while it just drains me. His words took me by surprise. The confident, carefree young man I knew was now exposing a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. Concern washed over me as I realized just how much he'd been carrying alone. Maybe it's time for a change, I said gently. He sighed, his gaze distant. Maybe, he murmured. But it's not that simple. People always have these expectations for me, you know? It's like I can't step off this path they've carved out without feeling like I'm letting everyone down. I moved closer, placing a reassuring hand on Greg's. Greg, I said, my voice steady but gentle. You don't have to live your life for anyone else. You're young. You've got time to figure things out, on your own terms. For a long moment he just stared at me. His eyes searched mine, intense and almost vulnerable. It caught me off guard, making my heart skip, though I wasn't sure why. The weekend flew by in a blur of quiet moments and long conversations that felt like peeling back layers of Greg I'd never seen before. First he was reserved, almost guarded. But as the days went on, he relaxed. His charm, warmth, and easy laughter began filling the house, making it feel alive in a way it hadn't in years. I didn't realize how much I'd missed having someone around. But there were moments, subtle, fleeting, yet impossible to ignore, when I caught him watching me. Not in a casual way either. His gaze would linger just a second too long, and there was something in it I couldn't quite place. It stirred feelings I didn't want to admit to myself. Greg's stay turned into something unexpectedly sweet. He had this knack for making the simplest tasks feel special. One afternoon we were in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner. Greg moved with an effortless rhythm, sneaking bites of cucumber between laughs. His grin was infectious and I couldn't help but smile. You're spoiling me, I teased, shaking my head. He winked, his expression soft but sincere. You deserve it, Aunt Maria. You do so much for everyone. It's about time someone took care of you. His words hit deeper than I expected. It had been so long since anyone made me feel cared for. And Greg did it so naturally, fixing little things around the house, brewing the perfect cup of tea in the morning, or simply being there. He made me feel seen, and I didn't realize how much I'd been craving that kind of attention. Then there was his playful side, the one that caught me off guard every time. Greg had this way of sneaking up behind me, wrapping me in a sudden hug or planting a quick kiss on my cheek before laughing at my startled reaction. Greg! I'd gasp, swatting at him half-heartedly. He'd just chuckle, his voice warm and teasing. You're always so serious, Aunt Maria. You need to loosen up. I'd laugh, pretending to be annoyed, but deep down, his lightheartedness felt refreshing. His touch lingered in my thoughts longer than I cared to admit, leaving me unsettled but undeniably alive. One evening I was curled up on the couch, lost in a book, when Greg plopped down beside me. He threw his arm casually around my shoulders, leaning in to peek at the pages. Is it a love story? He asked, his voice low and playful. That's none of your business, I shot back, trying to sound stern as heat crept up my neck. Greg laughed, that rich, deep sound that made my chest flutter. He shifted closer, his fingers brushing mine as he settled in. The brief contact sent a spark through me, and I quickly stood, pretending to adjust the curtains. You're restless, I muttered, avoiding his gaze. And you love it, he quipped, his mischievous grin making my breath hitch. I turned away, trying to compose myself, but his words stayed with me, echoing in my mind long after he'd gone. By the end of the weekend, Greg's presence was undeniable. His teasing remarks, the way his eyes lingered, and the casual intimacy of his gestures began to chip away at the walls I'd carefully built. I found myself anticipating his hugs, the sound of his laugh, and the way he made me feel awakened, in a way I hadn't been for years. Late one night, the house was quiet, the hum of the ceiling fan and the chirping of crickets the only sounds. I was in the kitchen putting away dishes when I heard footsteps. Turning, I saw Greg walk in shirtless. The dim light cast soft shadows across his chest and arms, and I felt my breath catch. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, his voice low, almost soothing. "Not really," I murmured, glancing away, feeling the weight of his gaze. He moved closer, leaning casually against the counter. His eyes, warm yet searching, met mine. "You've been quiet today," he said, his tone soft but probing. "Is something wrong?" I shook my head, but my chest felt tight. The air between us was thick, charged with something I didn't want to name. After a long pause, he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "You know, Aunt Maria," he began, his words slow and deliberate. "You're the most beautiful woman I've ever known." My breath hitched. His words hit me like a jolt, sending a warmth through me I wasn't ready for. I stood frozen, unsure of what to say or how to respond. The look in his eyes said everything, and nothing. For the first time in years, I felt completely unmoored, unsure of what to do with the feelings stirring inside me. My heart pounded, each beat echoing in the stillness between us. "Greg, don't say things like that," I murmured, my voice barely audible. My eyes darted away from his, unable to meet the intensity that burned in them. "Why not?" he asked, his voice steady yet laced with vulnerability, something raw and honest that made it difficult to brush him off. "It's the truth." He took another step closer, his hand lifted, slow and deliberate, giving me a chance to stop him. But I didn't. His fingers reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face, the touch so light it sent a shiver down my spine. My breath caught, betraying the internal battle raging within me. "Greg, this isn't—" I started, but the words faltered. "This isn't what?" he interrupted, his voice dropping to a near whisper. His certainty unnerved me, unraveling my carefully constructed defenses. I opened my mouth to protest, to put an end to this before it spiraled out of control. But no words came. Instead, I stood frozen, rooted in place as his hand slid to my waist. The heat of his touch seeped through the fabric of my clothes, pulling me closer. I felt the strength of his arms as they wrapped around me, his body warm and solid against mine. "Greg, we can't," I whispered, my voice trembling. But even as I spoke, my body betrayed me. I didn't step away. I stayed pressed against him, caught in the gravitational pull I couldn't seem to resist. His lips brushed against my cheek, achingly close to my own, his breath warm on my skin. The brief contact sent a jolt through me, leaving me breathless. Time seemed to freeze, the moment stretching endlessly, thick with everything we weren't saying but couldn't deny. I finally broke away, my chest heaving, my heart racing so loud I was sure he could hear it. "Good night, Greg," I managed, my voice barely audible as I stepped back, retreating before I lost control. He didn't stop me, but as I walked away, I felt his gaze follow me, heavy and unrelenting. It was as though he were waiting for me to turn back, to acknowledge the unspoken pull between us. When I reached my room, I shut the door behind me and leaned against it, my mind spinning. What had I done? What was happening between us? I tried to convince myself it was nothing, a fleeting moment that would fade with time. But deep down I knew better. Something had shifted, and there was no going back. I didn't want to admit it, but I craved Greg's attention in ways I hadn't before. His touch, his presence, the way he looked at me, it made me feel alive, desired, beautiful. The thoughts I tried so hard to push away kept coming back, each time stronger, more insistent. The next morning, Greg acted as though nothing had happened. He was his usual carefree self, playful and teasing. But when our eyes met, there was something different. A spark. A silent acknowledgement of the moment we had shared. As the days passed, the tension between us grew. Greg's touches became more deliberate, his teasing more daring. His words carried a weight that made my heart race, no matter how much I tried to fight it. One afternoon, the summer heat was unbearable. The sunlight streaming through the windows felt stifling, and I decided to take a cool shower. My room was bathed in golden light, the quiet punctuated only by the distant hum of life outside. I stepped out of my clothes, letting the fabric pool on the floor, and wrapped myself in a towel. The soft cotton felt cool against my skin, a small relief from the heat. My hair was tied back loosely, a few damp strands framing my face. Just as I was about to step into the bathroom, I remembered I'd left my phone on the coffee table in the living room. It didn't seem urgent. The constant ringing could wait a few minutes. But then I heard the sound of footsteps outside my door. They stopped, followed by a hesitant knock. "Aunt Maria?" Greg's voice called out softly. Before I could respond, the door creaked open. My heart dropped. Greg stood in the doorway, my phone in his hand. "Your phone's been..." His words trailed off as his eyes met mine. I was standing there, wrapped in nothing but a towel. My skin was still damp, a faint shimmer clinging to my shoulders in the soft afternoon light. For a moment, neither of us moved. His expression shifted, surprise, uncertainty, and something else I couldn't name. His eyes widened slightly, his gaze flickering over me before snapping back to my face. I didn't mean to," Greg stammered, his voice faltering for the first time. My breath hitched, the tension in the air so thick it felt like it might swallow us both whole. I tightened my grip on the towel, suddenly hyper-aware of how exposed I was. "It's fine," I managed, my voice shaky as I reached out to take the phone from his hand. But as my fingers brushed against his, I felt it again, that spark, that unrelenting pull. Greg stepped back, his eyes lingering on me for a heartbeat longer before he turned and left the room, closing the door behind him. I stood there, rooted in place, my heart racing as I replayed the moment in my mind. The way he looked at me, the way his presence seemed to fill the room. It was intoxicating, overwhelming. I didn't want to admit it, but the truth was undeniable. Something was happening between us, and no matter how much I tried to fight it, I couldn't ignore the pull any longer. His mouth opened like he was trying to form words, but nothing came out. My pulse quickened, my chest tightening as if the air in the room had grown heavier, denser. The once spacious space now felt impossibly small, the walls pressing in as the silence stretched unbearably thin. "Greg," I whispered, my voice barely audible, but it was enough to fill the charged space between us. My throat tightened and I couldn't bring myself to say anything more. Before I could process what was happening, Greg moved. It wasn't a hesitant shuffle. It was deliberate, swift, as if a decision had been made, and there was no turning back. Suddenly, he was in front of me, so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. His hands reached up, cradling my face with a gentle firmness that left me frozen in place. His thumbs brushed along the line of my jaw, his touch tender yet electrifying. His gaze locked onto mine, and I saw something flicker in his eyes, hesitation mixed with something deeper, rawer, something that made my breath hitch. "Aunt Maria, I can't hold back anymore," he murmured, his voice low, trembling with emotion that felt both desperate and undeniable. And then he kissed me. It wasn't what I expected. His lips were soft but unrelenting, moving against mine with a mix of tenderness and intensity that left me completely breathless. For a moment I stood frozen, my mind unable to catch up with the storm of sensations coursing through me. But then, as his hand slid from my face to my waist, pulling me closer, something deep inside me awakened, a longing I hadn't realized was there until that very moment. "Greg," I managed to whisper, breaking the kiss just enough to speak, but he didn't let me finish. His lips found mine again, this time with even more urgency, as though he was afraid to let the moment slip away. My towel slipped slightly, the knot loosening under the mounting tension. I clutched it instinctively, but Greg's hands were already there, steady and reassuring, his touch filled with a tenderness that made me feel as if I were something fragile, precious. "I've wanted this for so long," he confessed, his voice hoarse with raw emotion. His words sent a shiver down my spine. igniting a fire in me I couldn't ignore. My arms moved of their own accord, wrapping around his neck, pulling him closer. Our bodies seemed to fit together effortlessly, as though this moment had been waiting for us all along. I kissed him back, the intensity of my own response startling me. Years of buried desires, unspoken wishes, and suppressed emotions came rushing to the surface, crashing over me like a tidal wave. The afternoon sun, once gentle, now felt like it was blazing, its golden rays intensifying the heat between us as the rest of the world faded away. The towel slipped completely, falling to the floor in a forgotten heap. Greg's breath caught as he stepped back just enough to take me in. His eyes filled with awe and something deeper, something that made my heart stutter. "Maria," he breathed, his voice heavy with reverence. His hands traced the curves of my body, his touch slow, deliberate, as if he were memorizing every inch of me. "You're so beautiful," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The way he said my name, the way his eyes drank me in, left me completely undone. A blush spread across my cheeks as I met his gaze. There was nothing predatory in it, just raw, unfiltered adoration that made my chest ache in a way I couldn't explain. He leaned in again, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was deeper, more intimate, carrying unspoken promises and a longing that neither of us could deny. His hands slid over my shoulders, down my arms and back to my waist, pulling me into him as though he was afraid I might disappear. I could feel his heartbeat, strong and steady against my chest, echoing the chaotic rhythm of my own. His lips moved from my mouth to my neck, leaving a trail of soft, lingering kisses that sent waves of heat coursing through me. "You're incredible," he murmured against my ear, his voice low and trembling. "I've never seen anyone like you." The sincerity in his words made my heart swell. His hands traced a path down my back, every touch igniting something deep within me. My body responded instinctively, leaning into him, surrendering to the warmth and strength of his embrace. "Greg," I whispered, my voice barely audible, trembling under the weight of emotions I didn't know how to name. But he silenced me with another kiss, this one deeper, more consuming, as though he couldn't bear to let the moment end. His fingers gently cupped my face, his thumb brushing over my cheek, while his eyes searched mine with an intensity that left me breathless. "I've dreamed of this," he confessed, his voice breaking slightly. "I've dreamed of you." The confession hung between us, heavy with meaning. And as I looked into his eyes, so full of longing and honesty, I realized I couldn't fight this anymore. Whatever line we had crossed, there was no going back. In that moment all I could feel was him. His touch, his presence, his unwavering desire to make me feel wanted, cherished, alive. "Of holding you, of being close to you. You have no idea what you mean to me," Greg said, his voice raw and trembling with vulnerability. His words struck a chord deep within me, sending a ripple of emotions I hadn't realized I'd been holding back. My chest felt tight, not from sadness, but from a swelling ache of longing, one I hadn't allowed myself to feel in so long. Reaching up, my fingers brushed against his jawline, trembling slightly as I let them trace the contours of his face. He felt so real, so solid, like a reminder that life was still tangible, still full of possibilities. As I let my hand linger there, a thought I hadn't dared to voice slipped out. "I didn't know I could feel this way again," I admitted, my voice unsteady, cracking under the weight of the moment. Greg's gaze softened, his eyes never leaving mine. "You deserve to feel this way," he replied, his voice steady, his tone firm. "You deserve to be loved, to be cherished, to be wanted. You deserve this, Maria." His words weren't just spoken. They were a promise wrapping around me like a shield. I felt my walls beginning to crumble, the ones I had spent years fortifying. In that moment I realized I was finally ready to let go of everything holding me back. The room seemed suspended in time. The two of us cocooned in a world that felt like it existed solely for us. The sunlight filtering through the window cast a golden glow across the room, warming the air between us and heightening the intimacy of the moment. "Are you okay?" Greg asked softly, his voice gentle, his eyes searching mine for any flicker of uncertainty. There was a tenderness in the way he asked, an unspoken assurance that he wouldn't push if I needed space. I nodded, my lips curving into a soft smile. Yes, I said, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me. I'm more than okay. I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. The relief in his expression was unmistakable. His lips parted into a wide smile, one that reached his eyes, lighting up his face with an affection that stole my breath. Without hesitation, he leaned down and kissed me again. This time the kiss was different. It wasn't rushed or urgent. It was slow, deliberate, as if he wanted to savor every second. His hands cupped my face gently, his fingers threading through my hair as he drew me closer. Each kiss, each movement, carried an unspoken vow that made my heart ache in the most beautiful way. His lips lingered against mine before they began a slow trail down my jawline, brushing over the curve of my neck and pausing at my shoulders. Every touch was purposeful, filled with reverence, as if he was committing every inch of me to memory. I couldn't help the soft gasp that escaped my lips as his hands roamed my body, always maintaining contact, always steady, as though he was grounding me in this moment. You're perfect, he murmured, his voice barely audible against my skin, sending a shiver through me. Every inch of you. His words warmed me from the inside out, wrapping around me like a gentle embrace. It had been so long since I had felt this alive, this desired, and the way he looked at me made it clear he felt it too. Greg moved with such care, as though he could read every unspoken need I had, and together we explored something neither of us had expected but both desperately needed. Time melted away as we let ourselves get lost in each other, not just physically but emotionally. Every touch, every kiss felt like an unspoken confession, a silent unveiling of the feelings we had both kept hidden for far too long. I want you to feel loved, he whispered, his lips brushing my ear, his voice filled with so much emotion that it made my heart squeeze. I want you to know how much you mean to me. And in that moment I knew. I felt it in the way he held me, the way he kissed me, the way he whispered my name as if it was the most precious thing he'd ever known. The room was quiet except for the sound of our breathing, the rhythmic hum of the fan creating a soft background melody to our stolen moment. Greg pulled me closer, his arms wrapped around me protectively, his fingers tracing slow, delicate patterns along my arm. Each movement was a reassurance, a quiet declaration that he wasn't going anywhere. I've never felt this way before, Maria, he said after a while, his voice low but certain. You're not just someone I care about. You're everything to me. His words struck me like a wave, pulling me under with their weight. I struggled to find a way to respond, my emotions swirling too fast for me to catch hold of. I opened my mouth but the words caught in my throat, stuck beneath the flood of feelings threatening to spill over. Greg, this is all so new for me, I admitted finally, my voice trembling with the effort to say what I felt. But being here with you, it just feels right. It feels like I've found something I didn't even know I was missing. Something I didn't realize I needed. Greg smiled softly, his eyes warm and understanding as he leaned forward to press a kiss to my forehead. It was such a simple gesture, yet it made my heart swell in a way I couldn't explain. Then let's not overthink it, he whispered, his voice filled with quiet conviction. Let's just be together right here, right now. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, wrapped in each other's arms, the world outside forgotten. The gentle breeze from the fan mixed with the rhythm of our breathing, creating a sense of calm that settled over us like a blanket. Greg's fingers continued their soft patterns on my skin, his touch so tender it brought tears to my eyes. He rested his head against my shoulder, his voice barely audible as he whispered, "Are you okay?" Turning to meet his gaze, I saw nothing but love and concern in his eyes. "Yes," I said softly, my voice steady and sure. "I've never been better." "I don't know," I admitted, my voice quieter now, trembling with the weight of honesty. "But I don't regret it. Not at all." Greg's lips curled into a gentle smile, his warmth radiating in the way his hand reached up to brush a stray lock of hair from my face. The gesture felt so natural, so intimate, it sent a pang through me. "Neither do I," he said softly, his words simple yet carrying an unspoken promise, a reassurance that what we'd shared mattered just as much to him. For a while we lay there together, the noise of the outside world fading into insignificance. The stillness between us wasn't empty. It was full of meaning, a quiet comfort in which nothing else mattered except the connection we'd found. But as the afternoon light began to fade and the golden glow in the room dimmed, something inside me shifted. Reality began to seep back in, unraveling the fragile calm I'd wrapped myself in. The enormity of what had happened, what it meant for both of us, started to press down on me. Questions I hadn't dared to ask earlier now clawed at my thoughts. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange, I found myself sitting in the garden. The cool breeze kissed my skin, carrying the scent of blooming flowers, but it did little to quiet the storm inside me. I sat on the edge of the stone bench, staring out at the fading light, my mind racing. What did this mean for us? Had we crossed the line we couldn't uncross? Could we ever go back to how things were before? Or had we changed something fundamental, something irreversible? The uncertainty gnawed at me, heavy and unrelenting. I sat there, lost in thought, my heart warring with my head, wondering if the world I'd carefully built for myself had just been turned upside down. Greg's quiet footsteps broke through the stillness, and I glanced up to see him walking toward me. His presence was a stark contrast to the chaos in my mind. There was something calming about him, yet his nearness stirred up everything I'd been trying to suppress. "Maria," he began, his voice steady but tinged with a vulnerability that softened the edges of his words. "I know this is complicated, but I don't regret anything that happened today. And more than that," he hesitated, his eyes locking onto mine, "I don't want it to end here. Not like this." I turned to face him fully, my chest tightening with the weight of everything unsaid. My emotions were a tangled mess, desire, guilt, confusion, all colliding with the undeniable pull I felt toward him. "Greg, this isn't just complicated. It's wrong," I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. My voice shook, betraying the conflict inside me. But Greg didn't flinch. He didn't look away. Instead, his gaze held steady, his eyes burning with a determination that made my breath catch. "Why?" he asked, his tone quiet but firm, almost challenging. "Because of what people might say? Because of the age difference between us?" I shook my head, my fingers twisting together in my lap. It wasn't about what people might think or the years that separated us. Those weren't the things tying me up in knots. "No," I whispered, barely able to meet his eyes. "None of that matters to me. What matters is how I feel about you. And that's what's making this so hard." Greg exhaled slowly, his expression softening. His honesty hit me like a wave, the rawness of his words cutting through the fear I was clinging to. He wasn't hiding, wasn't holding anything back. Days passed, but the tension between us didn't ease. If anything, it grew heavier, lingering in every shared glance, every moment of silence. Greg gave me space, but his presence never wavered. He didn't push, but he didn't retreat either. And no matter how hard I tried to put distance between us, to ignore the feelings stirring inside me, I couldn't deny the way the air seemed to hum whenever he was near. That moment we'd shared, intense, intimate, had changed everything. It was in my bones, in the way my body reacted to his presence, in the way my thoughts kept circling back to him. One evening, as I sat on the couch, trying in vain to distract myself with the mindless drone of the television, I felt him before I heard him. His quiet approach sent a ripple through the room, and when he spoke, his voice was soft, careful. "Maria," he said, standing just a few steps away. His tone carried a mix of hesitation and resolve, the kind of determination that wouldn't be ignored. I looked up, meeting his gaze. His eyes held mine, open and searching, vulnerable yet steady. Without a word, he moved to sit beside me, the space between us disappearing in an instant. "I don't want to keep pretending," Greg said, his voice low but clear, his words carrying a weight that settled in my chest. "I don't want to act like nothing happened when all I can think about is you." The air seemed to thicken around us, his words hanging there, waiting for a response I didn't know how to give. My throat tightened, and my heart thudded painfully in my chest. "Greg, this isn't easy for me," I said finally, my voice shaking. "I've spent my whole life being so careful, so cautious. And now everything feels different. Overwhelming. Greg's expression softened, a small understanding smile tugging at his lips. Maybe it's time for something different, he said gently, his voice soothing. He reached for my hand then, his fingers wrapping around mine in a way that felt both comforting and grounding. The warmth of his touch spread through me, steadying the storm that had been raging inside. I looked at him, really looked at him. Not just as the familiar, charming young man I'd known for years, but as someone who saw me. Someone who cared, not out of obligation, but out of genuine affection. Someone who saw me not just as his aunt, but as a woman. In that moment, something inside me shifted. A quiet but undeniable change that rolled through me like a gentle wave, leaving nothing untouched. Before I could fully process what I was doing, I leaned toward him, closing the small space between us. I was drawn to him by a force I couldn't resist, one I didn't want to fight anymore. When my lips met his, the kiss was hesitant at first, soft, almost questioning, but it quickly deepened, as though we both realized this was where we were meant to be. The world around us seemed to disappear, leaving only us in its place. His hands cupped my face, his thumbs brushing lightly against my cheeks, sending a shiver down my spine. That kiss was more than just an act. It was a release, an unspoken confession of all the emotions we'd held back. It was a promise, silent but powerful, that we were no longer going to deny what we felt. He kissed me as if I was the only person who mattered, as if nothing else in the world could possibly hold his attention. When we finally pulled away, both of us breathless and wide-eyed, I saw something in his gaze that made my heart race, a depth of emotion that both thrilled and terrified me. That moment changed everything. There was no going back, no pretending we could return to what once was. Greg and I began finding ways to steal time together. They were quiet, private moments that felt like they belonged to a world separate from the one outside. Cooking together became more than just a chore. It was filled with laughter and stolen touches. Walks through the garden felt like slow, deliberate acts of intimacy. Even sitting side by side on the couch became a ritual of comfort, his hand always finding mine, his fingers lacing with mine as though he never wanted to let go. Greg showed his feelings in ways both big and small. He surprised me with flowers picked fresh from the garden, their bright colors a vivid reminder of the joy he'd brought into my life. Sweet, handwritten notes would appear in the most unexpected places, tucked inside my book on the counter, or slipped into my coat pocket, each one making my heart swell. One evening, as we sat outside under the stars, the cool night air wrapping around us, Greg turned to me with an expression that was both serious and tender. "I want you to know something," he began, his voice steady but brimming with emotion. "I'm not going anywhere. No matter what happens, no matter what we have to face. I'm here. I'm with you." His words hit me with a force I wasn't prepared for, tears welling in my eyes as their meaning settled into my heart. I reached for his hand, gripping it tightly, my voice trembling as I replied, "Greg, you've brought so much light into my life. I don't even know who I'd be without you." His lips curved into a soft, reassuring smile, the kind of smile that felt like home. "You'll never have to find out," he said, pulling me into his arms. And in that moment, wrapped in his embrace, I knew without a shred of doubt that we were in this together, no matter what the future held. Our love became something deeply personal, a secret we guarded fiercely, a bond that grew stronger with every passing day. We knew the world might never understand what we shared, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the solace we found in each other, the way our hearts had begun to heal in the quiet moments we spent together. With Greg, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. He reignited a spark I thought was gone forever, filling my life with a hope I didn't realize I still had the capacity to feel. In his arms, I discovered a love that was both tender and unyielding, a love uniquely ours, one that beat with its own rhythm, one we protected fiercely.